This is Talking Mule Deer with your hosts Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. Talking Mule Deer takes you on a journey to learn more about the Mule Deer Foundation, mule deer and black-tailed deer biology and management, tips and tactics for hunting, conservation issues, and even features some of our corporate and celebrity partners. Now, let's start talking mule deer.
Hello, and welcome back to Talking Mule Deer. I'm Steve Belinda.
And I'm Jody Stemler, and today we are talking with Rob Southwick with Southwick Associates and Jim Curcuruto, who's with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. You guys, I've worked with you for a long time. Thank you very much for taking the time to come out today and visit with us a little bit.
Glad to be here.
Great.
Yep.
We appreciate your time. You guys have a rather unique niche in the conservation, wildlife, shooting sports function, and that is you guys study what is driving the economics of hunting and angling and shooting. You guys study the trends in markets and things to understand what's going on. So tell us a little bit first about yourself, and then we're going to talk today a little bit about those types of studies and why it's relevant to the people on the ground and what you're learning. So, Rob, why don't you get started a little bit? Tell us about yourself and where you come from and what you're doing.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. My company is Southwick Associates. We've been in business now 30 years, focusing exclusively on the hunting, the fishing,
You're
the
not
shooting.
that
outdoors.
old.
Yes, time goes by. But yes, it's been a fun 30 years. We love what we do. It's a real pleasure to go to work every day studying the very activities that you love as a person. It's really hard to define when the workday stops and the play day begins because we love the outdoors. But we began right out of college on some major fishery issues back then. There was a lot of questions about how do we manage these fisheries? Is it commercial? Is it recreational? And it came down to economics. No one was really studying the economics of people in the outdoors. The thought was that people, when they're hunting, fishing, shooting, that's just play. That's not a work day. That's what people kept saying back then. And we knew in the industry that that's not true. And so our business grew on explaining to elected officials, to local governments, that people, when they're out playing, they're spending money and they're creating jobs and it's doing good things for the economy. So you need to pay attention to conservation, outdoors, and we grew a whole business on doing that. It's been 30 years and it's been fun.
Did you start off as an economist, or did
Yes.
you? Okay.
Began as an economist.
All right. So it's not like you were like a lot of us are biologists first, and then we get into policy or other aspects of the profession, but you were actually a numbers person.
That's correct.
And stuck in it. So I just wanted to make that clarification because I couldn't tell you why economics would, if you're going to go wrestle a grizzly bear or go count numbers, I know which one I did. So
Yeah. But as we all know, I mean, when people talk about an issue, inevitably they bring in the economic impact of what that issue is and how it's going to affect a local community or the big picture, because in our economy, in our country, we value things that have a larger impact than just the individual thing. So being able to communicate the economic impact of hunting and shooting and fishing has been a very important tool, because it really makes those pastimes, those fun things that we do, that much more relevant in the scheme of business and industry in this country, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure does.
So Jim, tell us a little bit, what's your background?
Sure. I grew up in Putnam County, New York, about 40 miles north of New York City, and spent as much time as possible outside. I was, I spent a lot of time chasing rainbow trout and missing rough grouse. I didn't have a dog, so I learned the hard way. But
how many woodcock did you miss too, where they fly straight up?
Yeah, we missed a lot of those as well. Realized that I should have probably had a dog growing up, but it was a lot of fun, and I feel very fortunate to be with National Shooting Sports Foundation now for about 10 plus years. And NSSF is the trade association for the firearms and ammunition industry. We're a business-to-business organization that works with the manufacturers, the retailers, and the ranges. And again, one of the fun things about working in that industry is everybody that works in the industry, you can walk up to anybody at any time and talk about, what's your latest trip to the field. And then when you get a little bit more serious and start talking about the research and the economic impact of hunting and target shooting, it really opens up a lot of people's eyes, not only within the industry, but then using that data outside the industry. You don't really see hunters, right? You're driving by, you might see a ball field, and you see people participating in basketball and outdoor sports like that, but they don't realize that how many hunters are really out there and how many target shooters are out there and the economic impact of it. So It's really fun working with smart guys like Rob, an economist, to dig deep into the number of jobs supported by hunting and target shooting, as well as the economic impact of the taxes and really the things that go toward conservation that a lot of people don't know about, which is kind of weird because it is such a main driver of conservation in the United States that we want to tell that story and get it out to as many people as we can.
And it's important because, when people are trying to marginalize, particularly hunters and maybe shooters as well, and say that it's a small part of the country or they really aren't having that much of an impact, it's really important for those folks to be able to understand and then be able to carry that message out themselves when they say, well, actually, I'm not just one, I'm millions, or and we're having an impact here. So one of the flagship products that you guys have put together and worked together on for a number of years, and it's kind of a collaborative across a number of other organizations as well, using data that comes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that they gather every 5 years. It's called the I'm blanking right now on the names. National Survey on Fishing, Hunting,
And Wildlife
Recreation. There we go. I mean, how many years have I
What they
known
said.
That? Yeah, the National Survey is what we all know it as. So when
Exactly.
you try to get that long name out there. But they do this survey, and then you guys take the data and the sub-data. This is a very complex data set, and you're able to kind of break it down of how many hours they're spending in the field, how much do they spend on a trip. So tell us a little bit. And then also, one of the things that's been pretty cool is you connect that to other industries that people think are super mainstream, and realize that hunting and shooting and fishing actually are pretty much up there with some of these big companies. Give me a little bit of background on that.
Well, absolutely. There are a lot of numbers. We could bury you in the numbers. I just don't want to just throw numbers out. Got to put them in context. Numbers don't mean anything standing by themselves. Just what you said there, comparing them to known industries, known activities, is what makes a number real and makes people say, wow, that really is significant. Overall, the whole industry we're looking at is hunting and target shooting together, and we have the numbers broken out too. But we know altogether there's about 13.5 million people who go hunting every year, and there's about another close to 40 million people who go target shooting, and they spend a lot of money. A typical hunting trip is about a $184 injection into the economy.
That's an
Oh,
average.
that's cheap.
That's an average.
That's average.
Right.
That's average. So
Yep.
yeah, your week-long trip for elk, no, you're not going to get away with that price. But going out a dove field near your house, sure, it's lower cost, but averages together.
But then let's magnify that out and see how much, when it's $184 a trip, what does that mean?
Yeah, altogether, you're coming down to around $44 billion
Wow.
a year.
Wow,
And
say that again?
$44 billion. Exactly. And
Billion.
That's direct, right?
direct. That's out of their
Direct,
pockets.
okay.
So
That is money actually spent in pursuit of hunting and target shooting.
correct. And to put that in the context so it makes some sense. Now, everyone knows how important Black Friday is to the economy. And that whole weekend, that Friday through Sunday, that is about $43 billion a year.
Wow.
And so, again, as Jim is
Entire
mentioning,
retail. Yep.
these activities people don't see going on, but we have millions of people doing it, spending billions of dollars. It's significant, but we're not quite getting that media coverage about how important hunting season is. It's about to open up for rural economies.
But you know what's similar? Is folks are waiting in the dark to go do stuff like they do at the,
Well, that's
Yes.
true.
The store's
We're all
open.
getting up
Yeah.
early.
go
Whether we're
spend money
going
now.
to Black Friday sales
Yeah.
or going out to the
Oh,
duck
exactly.
blind.
I've done that too. I've stopped at Cabela's before going out. 4 in the morning, stop at Cabela's, and then hit the deer field.
Well, and it's what's important actually is when you look at a rural community where people go to duck hunt or to mule deer hunt, those communities depend on that dollars coming in, those trip expenses that people put in there, right?
Exactly, because through that time of the year, the crops are already in, and so the income is low. You're not during the winter time. You're not doing field treatments. The agricultural economy slows down when hunting season picks up. So it fills a critical gap during that time for the economy in that area.
So you said 13 million hunters?
About 13.5
Yeah,
million
13 and a
hunters.
half, 44 billion a year. As a biologist, we often look at trends. And we determine how well we're doing or what are the indicators of how well a population is doing based on trend data. What have the numbers been through time? Are we declining? Are we increasing? Are we, are our R3 efforts being successful? Is all the gadgetry and other stuff out there driving more money into the economy? What are the trends we're seeing right now?
you want to hit?
Sure. You have dual trends going on here. When it comes to participation, hunting has been flat. The last couple of years, it's declined a little bit. Some years it peaks up. Typically, when the economy slows down during recessionary periods, people have more time on their hands. And then we'll see people out hunting more often. We see fishing license sales go up. But what's really happened in the economic side is the amount of gear available. With the expansion of new hunting opportunities, longer seasons, people are investing more. So the typical hunter is spending close to twice as much now as they were about 25 years ago. I mean, think about it, turkey seasons compared to when we were kids, how long they were and the opportunities you have. The gear, used to be you have your one shotgun that you use for deer hunting, for bird hunting, migratory, for turkey hunting. Now you have specialized firearms for each season. And so the product that's out there, some people say hunting's getting too expensive. It's not true at all. Because it's voluntary. You can still buy one shotgun for all types of activities. But people choose not to because they enjoy it. It gives them better experience in the field. It is a voluntary purchase. And has really driven the industry in the last few years. And, of course, all the benefits that come along with it for conservation.
So in the last 10 years, we've seen gear explosion. I mean, there's every type of camo under the sun. There's specialty gear for every type of hunting and angling adventure out there. I saw something the other day that just shocked me. There's now memes going around the internet on social media about gear shaming people, that if we have the means or we choose to go buy a certain level of gear, particularly the more expensive stuff, that there are now people trying to, I don't know if it's bullying or whatever, but they're through memes saying, oh, you think you're an elitist or something like that. I never saw something like that. I looked at it this way: spend what you want to spend. But get out there and enjoy it as long as you're getting out there.
Yeah, I've seen some of those too, and it's a little bit frustrating because that's all, we're all in this together here, and it does go back historically when you have your traditional archer versus the compound guy, and now the compound guy versus the crossbow guy. So it's kind of funny that we have bickering, but that happens within any community as well. But it's nice to see us all get together on some of the bigger issues. When we do use the data that Rob crunches here, that $44 billion, one of the primary things that we do is inform not only the consumers about what's going on, but for us as a trade association, it's very important to have those numbers for Capitol Hill when we're going down there and trying to either fight anti-sportsman legislation or enact, some pro-legislation as well. So the numbers that's pretty much.
Politicians like numbers, don't
That's exactly it.
particularly economic numbers.
And if you don't have how many jobs are supported by an event or an activity, you're not going to get very far.
How many jobs, Rob?
850,000 jobs in the United States would disappear. People stopped spending money on hunting and target shooting and did not spend that money anywhere else.
Wow.
That's a big number. I mean, it's bigger than the population of Alaska, North Dakota, Vermont, a number of states. Just the employees.
Wow. That's significant. I mean, because jobs talk, particularly in a big economy like we're going through right now, where it's pretty stable. If you start to lose jobs, you're starting to lose the trickle down through communities is significant with that.
Well, the jobs overall, if those jobs disappeared, the U.S. unemployment rate would go up just over 0.5%.
Wow.
That's enough for politicians to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
That's why they pay attention to these job figures.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said the $44 billion was direct spending. Do you know how much indirect or leverage spending is associated with that?
Yes. Top of my head is a roundabout number. I can't remember every number in detail, but you're hitting around $109 billion at that point.
Wow.
And that's
effect.
so
Right.
explain the ripple effect concept, and when you talk economically, because you can talk about direct spending. That's $1 in is the amount that's spent. Correct. A ripple effect means that dollar then
travels through the economy.
In how? And so it is the person who collects that dollar.
Correct.
Goes and uses it somewhere else, and that impacts another aspect of the community. They wouldn't have had that dollar. Is that a good way to represent it?
And that's how the benefits are derived. That's how everybody in the country benefits from hunting and target shooting, any activity. So let's say you're a hunter and you're traveling out of town. You're staying at a hotel somewhere. So you're spending money at the hotel. You're spending money at the restaurants. Well, they have to pay their employees, who may not be hunters or target shooters, but they're benefiting from the dollars. So they're taking those dollars home. They're buying groceries. They're paying their bills. Then the restaurant has to buy more supplies, so the wholesalers benefit. It goes down to the farm economy. They have to buy more food, more supplies. They have to pay power. They have to pay all the service. They have to pay garbage collection. So every part of the economy benefits from the hunters and target shooters' dollars. And that's a critical point that they make going to the Capitol Hill talking to politicians. That everybody benefits.
Yep. And it's important to note that, obviously it's directly to the companies, and that's important. And they may be, some of them may be in larger cities and more metropolitan areas. But we're also talking about these small little communities that may not have income from other areas as well. That the hunting, shooting, places where you can get outside depend on people coming in and being able to recreate and use those areas. And so that economy, that economic impact isn't just in the big cities. It's talking about, in the middle of the country or in the small towns anywhere in the country that this is helping.
True, and the big cities too.
And the big cities
the
as well,
importers,
yeah.
the services, the amount of money that goes into New York City and Chicago from hunters and anglers out in rural areas is huge.
Yeah.
So are hunting and shooting equal contributors to this money that we're talking about here? Do you know the differences?
Yes, they're not equal. Hunting injects more. It's about $27 billion comes from hunters, and then about $17 billion comes from target shooters. Mm-hmm. Even though you have more target shooters than hunters, I mean, think about it. The amount of gear you have. Yeah. You mentioned technical clothing. You don't quite need all that for target shooting.
Don't look in my garage.
We often joke about, we call these the divorce numbers. We tell folks not to tell their spouses about how much money they're spending on these activities. But the typical hunter spends around $2,000 a year. Okay. The average, again.
That's average, right.
Right. So the person staying local, the typical target shooter spends about a fourth of that on an annual basis.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that they may economically not have as much, or slightly different there, but in terms of the excise taxes that hunters and shooters pay by the purchase, that's the excise tax that manufacturers pay on products. Target shooters pay a lot more a lot of times into that, into what is used for conservation. Is that true?
Yeah, it's about 75%. If you think about the three categories that are collected, have an excise tax collected on them. You've got your handguns, your long guns, and your ammunition. So handguns primarily are not used for hunting, so majority of that excise tax is coming from non-hunting purposes. The long guns, the shotguns, and the rifles, you can certainly make a case for an even split there, or maybe even a little bit more on the hunting side of things. But ammunition, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Steve, about target shooter hitting 10,000 rounds a year, and a hunter's not shooting that much. I don't care how much hunting you're doing, how bad a shot you are. You're not going through 10,000 rounds. So, Rob had talked about the benefits of speaking about the economics of impact and how that ripple effects really affects people, but really it affects the conservation aspect of things as well. So about 500 manufacturers pay an excise tax, and it comes out to about $675 million a year. And as you know, I think you talked about this with Bill Dunn, that that is a major contributor to conservation because all those funds go to state wildlife agencies, and everybody benefits from the great work that those guys are doing for building wildlife communities. And
is that unique in our community that the money goes directly back to benefit those things that you're spending the money on? I mean, we're not taking it and running it off to the Cayman Islands. It's
right.
going
Yeah,
right
you can't fill potholes with it. As much as some people try to raid that system, it was set up by some really smart people back in the 1930s, and we're very fortunate to have that North American model of conservation. It is the envy of the world. So we're going to keep that going.
Another thing about the whole excise tax program, by law, if a state is to receive their allocation of those excise tax dollars, they also have to require all hunting and fishing license dollars are 100% dedicated back to fish and wildlife conservation. So a state agency can't try to divert those dollars to build roads somewhere.
They try.
They try,
yeah. But they lose every time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because they will lose all these excise tax dollars.
All of the federal funds that came in, they have to pay that back if they divert those licenses. So it's a really important aspect. So we talk about the conservation, and that's a huge part of it. But an increasing part of what's being used for the excise dollars is actually range development, and that's something that we're working on to try to ensure. In fact, in Colorado, which is where I live, I know the Colorado Parks and Wildlife has created a couple new, including one out by Grand Junction, the Cameo Shooting Sports Complex, that is world-class, providing more opportunities for hunters to sight in. My husband sighted in my daughter's rifle before elk season there this year. But there's going to be handgun, USPSA. I mean, so it's target shooting as well. So it's creating opportunities for target shooters as well, using those excise tax dollars in partnerships with the state wildlife agencies, right?
Sure is. And, NSSF had a big part in that. For 12 years, we had tried to get some legislation passed. We call it the Range Bill, and it did just get passed this past year. And it makes it easier for state wildlife agencies to use those excise tax funds to support their consumer, what we talked about, the target shooter, by building those ranges closer. We know through the research that we've conducted over the years that you're going to get more participation if you have a range within 30 minutes of people. You'll get less and less. The further out a range, further people have to go do something, the less they're going to participate in it. So we're pretty excited about that, and we're looking to work with state wildlife agencies to build more facilities to reach out to target shooters, and then we'll hope that they're going to bring somebody new with them.
Yeah.
Is it tough to get a range built these days? And the reason I ask that is I live in a small community in Montana. We don't have a range. We have some areas out on public land that are de facto ranges, but we don't have a range. And for the 10 years I've lived there, said, how come no one's putting a range in through Recreation for Public Purposes Act, or wealthy landowner, or just the community getting together saying we need it?
Well, that's cute that it's tough to build a range in Montana. Try doing it in Connecticut. Where I'm
Yeah.
That's
but,
cute.
Yeah.
I like the way you said that. That's
It
cute.
is very difficult. And,
You're cute, Steve.
So,
Hey, she's finally realizing something the rest of us have known for a long time. So.
But yes, it is difficult. We took away one of those barriers, which was the regulations, and we have heard from state wildlife agencies that they've got some shovel-ready projects that they're looking to do. I've heard from folks out in Nebraska that they're ready to do some things down in Florida. So Montana may be on the list, and we'll put a good word in for you.
It's as you know, running a range is a lot of work. There's a lot of environmental issues. There's a lot of safety issues, everything else. And when you live in a town of less than 2,000 people, it's hard to get that commitment.
Right.
And I think that's probably more of the issue than that the community wouldn't support it or embrace it. I mean, I teach hunter ed. We don't really have a range to go to during that process. I do it all. I've sort of become by the shooting bench, back of the truck, go out to a place that I know, do all that. But it would be really nice to be able to go, particularly if we had archery associated with it, but we don't.
So you guys do some other research, though, besides the gun? Or was there any other economic stats that we didn't do that you think we should pass on?
Well, there's a couple there related to ranges. The demand for target shooting is much greater than I think most people realize. And it comes down to access. Research is showing clearly, a number of times we found this in studies, that if someone has to drive more than 30 minutes, odds are they're going to quit. Right. They're not going to go at all, or they're going to drop out. Yet, the majority of the American public lives further than 30 minutes from an adequate range. So indoor ranges are critical in urban areas. A lot of growth there. But the investments of these tax dollars in ranges or hunting, the numbers are really solid what happens over time. I've got a couple of numbers here that we pulled out about the results of the excise tax dollars for hunting. People don't realize that the hunting opportunities come from these tax dollars. For example, Ohio, they started turkey hunting back in 1966. They took 12 birds that year. Yet the turkey population was brought back because of license dollars, excise taxes. Last year, they took over 21,000 birds.
Oh, wow.
So from 12 to 21,000, because the excise taxes that we're paying are creating these great opportunities.
That's a great connection.
You don't think of New Jersey being a great hunting state?
Well, I grew up there.
Yeah, well, you might know better. Most people in the country don't realize it. Yeah, but in 1930s, they had 6-day deer season. That's it every year. Now, if you live in New Jersey, you can hunt deer for 161 days.
Yep.
Half the year. It's amazing.
Just don't hunt bears on state land.
Yeah, we won't go there. So yeah, that's pretty important, and a very we talk a lot about that excise tax and how important that is. But I don't necessarily know that the people that are fully realize what that did. And the other flip side of that is not necessarily connecting the tax paying companies not fully understanding what the states are doing with that. So you guys do something called Partner with a Payer, that you've created a situation where state fish and wildlife agencies, gun companies, the federal, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, you guys have done days where you swap jobs. You went on to a Colt factory, right?
Sure. I mean, it's really important. We've got all these different organizations doing really good work, and they all have the same goal of increasing participation in hunting and target shooting, but we've been working separately. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NSSF, and the state wildlife agencies got together and said, let's invite the manufacturers that pay an excise tax out in the field and see what we do. And we've done it numerous times. We've had staff from a lot of excise tax paying manufacturers that took a day off, went out into the field. They saw bear den studies in Connecticut.
I've seen pictures with them holding the
Yep.
cubs.
And prescribed burns
yep.
in Massachusetts. We've done some things down in Maryland, and every time we do one, we had some staff from Remington and Kimber go meet with Alabama Department of Natural Resources, tour a facility, 8,000 acres that was purchased with excise tax dollars. They got taught about how the land is managed, the dove fields that they do, and also the ROI on a project like that, because a state is getting this money and they want to use it for good purposes, which is they build it and they will come type of thing. So you get to see from the manufacturer's perspective how the money is being used, and every time we do one, it's a major positive reaction from everybody involved. And on the other side of things, the state wildlife agencies, those folks are really good at knowing the land, but they may not know exactly where the money is coming from. They know they get a big check every year, so we've taken them on factory tours of Colt and Smith & Wesson and Mossberg, and when they go there and they see where those the firearms are coming from and the great people that are making that product, they have a better understanding. And it's really opened up a lot of partnerships where the states are now working better with the manufacturers, which is great because the state wildlife agencies do a good job talking to wildlife, and the manufacturers have marketing teams and advertising teams that are really good at talking to people. So now they're combining those skill sets, and I'm pretty excited about the next generation of.
Well, that's an awesome feedback loop, because oftentimes we don't, unless we see things, the results of our actions, we don't really appreciate, what it really meant. Mm-hmm. And so this way you're getting out there, someone's just not a check anymore. They're actually seeing what happens with that money. And
so we got to wind down a little bit here,
Sure.
But I know you guys do some other cool. Do you want to give just a couple top lines of some of the other reports that you guys have either worked on together, or something else that you think that Mule Deer Foundation members would be interested in hearing about?
I'll close it out, with the Future Gun Owners of America report. It's the most exciting research that I've done in my 11 years at NSSF. We identified that there's 24 million people that want to buy their first firearm. They have a high interest in it. A lot of that is for learning how to hunt and learning how to target shoot. A big number of people want to learn buy a firearm for personal protection. But we quantified it. We know that there's a big audience that want to buy that, and that's going to help the cycle of excise taxes go, and more ranges and more hunters out there. So everything's looking good for conservation. But we all have to work together to recruit the new generation. We know they're out there. They have their hand up. They're waiting for three things. They're waiting for information on how to get started. They're waiting for an invitation from somebody they know and trust. And if you add a little incentive, so those three I's,
say it again:
information, invitation, and incentive are going to really move the needle, and we're going to see an explosion in participation in hunting and target shooting if we all work together and do this together. And that includes Mule Deer Foundation. People that are listening, bring somebody new with you. There's a lot of people out there, coworkers that you've been walking by for 10 years. Ask them. You'll be surprised they'll want to do it.
Well, and that'll keep that user pay model perpetual,
Exactly.
North American approach, keeping it going. So,
gentlemen, thank you so much. I know you guys have busy schedules, so taking the time to talk to us
Sure.
and help explain, because that's something we talk about a lot, but I'm not sure we've ever really drilled down into what the economic impact and also the excise tax model and why that's important. So
it's a dry subject.
It's tough for people to understand. Not tough to understand, but it
I think it can be exciting, and I think these guys have made it exciting.
Yep.
Where we deal with competing interests, economics can be the great equalizer, where
Right.
we can say, your issue is no bigger than our issue because we're doing this. And, when you get into those where someone has to choose something that will affect hunting and
gives us a seat
shooting.
at the table.
That's right, yeah.
So thank you, Jim. Thank you, Rob. We
Pleasure.
appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
It's always great working with you. Thank you for your time. And until next time, this is Jody Stemler.
And I'm Steve Belinda, and thank you for Talking Mule Deer.
Thanks for Talking Mule Deer with Steve Belinda and Jody Stemler. The Mule Deer Foundation is the only conservation group in North America dedicated to restoring, improving, and protecting mule deer and black-tailed deer and their habitat. MDF is a strong voice for hunters in access, wildlife management, and conservation policy issues. To find out more, visit www.muledeer.org and stay tuned for the next episode of Talking Mule Deer.